So I just have one question for my audience. Who won? Who is history going to remember as the winner? You see, in Asian cultures, this is important. I would like anyone to show me a time in history where there was a war ended and there wasn't a clear delineation of who won and who lost. The U.S. withdrew from Vietnam. We weren't the primary party involved there. And clearly the communists won. This has been an armistice for a long time, and caveat real quick, this is not a knock on the president. This video is not about that. This predates him, this issue, by a long shot, and this might be the greatest mistake the world has ever made. You see, because there's something in the subtext here that no one is reading. We have, for our entire lives, and I'm speaking to my audience that is about my age, and those older, have lived with the idea of a South Korea that is free and US-like in the way that it operates, and we have a North Korea that is Chinese-like in the way that it operates. Two distinct nations sharing one continent. You see, they're not talking about just getting rid of the demilitarized zone here. They're talking about reunification. And so my question would be, who would be president? Who would be in charge of the military? What would the attitudes be toward China and or the United States? A few months back, the olive branch was put out by our administration about the denuclearization of North Korea and the current leader granting a visit to the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Then we saw a very strange series of events, and I'm going to try to cover that series because it happened all by surprise and very, very fast. The first thing we saw was this. Even the U.S. didn't know about this. This was about 24, 25 March. Summoned to Beijing before dear leader Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un hops on a train. Then we see this massive show of force by the Chinese in the South China Sea. Then, sometime later, we have the director of the, that's not the director of the CIA, the director of the CIA have a secret meeting over Easter weekend. So all three of these events happen between March 25 and April 1, 2-ish, in that order. The olive branch is extended by the president about the denuclearization deal, grants him a visit, some visit at some point in time in the future. Then we see the secret meeting, then we see the show of force, then we see the CIA show up in North Korea, and now, strangely enough, we see this. Now, I want you to wrap your mind around this idea of them being one country with one military, with one president. Do you think, honestly, that the Chinese are going to let this peninsula become a U.S. haven? A U.S. outpost? Hell no. So who do you think the leader of Korea unified is going to be? You see, the one thing that's been holding the North Koreans back, allegedly, is their inability to feed their people, their lack of finances because of all the sanctions. Imagine the imperialist drive of the North Koreans backed by the Chinese, but with all of the wealth of the South Koreans, all of the food of the South Koreans, and everything that they know and have learned over the last 70 years from the U.S. military. Yeah, that's an oh fuck moment right there. Big time. And just to give you an idea of what the combined militaries of the South Koreans and the North Koreans would look like, I brought up global firepower. And, pardon this while it reloads, this is the U.S. Of course, we're number one. And in aircraft, there's really no comparison. Compared to the two, in aircraft, we have quite a few more. That is the one thing we have on them. And that's the only thing we have on them, believe it or not, is aircraft. Total military personnel, 2 million. Active personnel, 1.28. Now, that's U.S. total. Here's South Korea. One second. South Korea has a total military personnel of 5.8, active 625,000. North Korea has 945,000 and 6.4 total military personnel. So let me put this in perspective for you in totals. Combined military strength, total military personnel. North Korea, 6.4 million. South Korea, 5.8 million. Comes to 12.2-ish million. Total military personnel, active personnel, 625,000 for the South Koreans, and 945,000 for the active. So you're talking about 1.5-ish million. So we're going to have a continent with 1.5 million active military folks with a grand total of, what was our number? Almost 12 million. Here's the U.S. They will have 300,000 more active personnel and 10 million more total military personnel. This is just Korea, not including China. Now, aircraft strength, I've said, we have quite a bit more. You can look these up if you want on globalfirepower.com. We pretty much have them in aircraft, but in ground assets, it's not even close. It's not even close. We have 5,800 tanks. The North Koreans alone have 5,200. And before anyone asks, the numbers that I'm showing you are just South Korean specific assets, not South Korean plus U.S. forces. Just so you know, and I made that clear, I looked in this and they aren't talking about what we have over there combined with the Koreans. But just to show you this real quick, 5,800 combat tanks for us. South Koreans, 2,600 combat tanks, and the North Koreans, 5,200. So, North Korea, 5,200, South Korea, 2,600, would give you 7,800 combat tanks. The U.S. only has 5,800. So they'd have 2,000 more tanks, 300,000 more people, 2,000 more tanks. The artillery numbers are basically the same disproportion. And like I said, this is just South Korea, North Korea, not including China. I would not be wanting to live in Japan if this peace, quote-unquote, peace, denuclearization, reunification deal goes through. Here's what's real frightening. Total naval assets. Now, of course, we have 20 aircraft carriers. They don't have anything like that. But, as we know, submarines can play a major role in especially warfare in the homeland, meaning that the Chinese could control that entire region. They wouldn't need aircraft carriers to do it. They could do it with submarines. Now, this is the U.S. total. No, excuse me. Yeah, U.S. total, 66 submarines. Now, given some of these are boomers, so there's that. But just to give you an idea of how powerful the Korean military would be, it would vault to the third. Well, excuse me, fourth. there would be the U.S., and it would, I tell you what, it would be close, because there'd be the U.S., the Russians, the Chinese. Right now the Indians are fourth, but the combined forces of these two would be real, real close. They'd move from being 10, 15, 20-ish area up to one of the most powerful militaries in the whole world. But 66 submarines. South Korea. Only 16. But the North Koreans have 86. So they'd have 102 submarines, grand total, to our 66. We have 65 destroyers. 12 for the South Koreans, none for the North Koreans. So we'd have them there. The idea is this. The U.S. would no longer be controlling those assets. And I brought up something, and I know it's going to sound irrelevant, but it's very relevant to me. I covered this a long time ago for another purpose. This was Donald Trump's speech to AIPAC, and once again, this is not a knock on the administrator, but this goes to this art of the deal thing. Because down here, he's talking about Iran, he's talking about the deal with Israel and the Palestinians. But he talks about deal making in general. And he says something here that is very relevant. Okay. He's talking here in reference to this alleged UN imposed deal on the Israelites and the Palestinians. But he makes a general statement here. When people ask why, it's because that's not how you make a deal. Deals are made when parties come together. They come to a table and they negotiate. Each side must give up something. It's values. I mean, we have to do something where there's value in exchange for something that it requires. That's what a deal is. A deal is really something that when we impose it on Israel and Palestine, we bring together a group of people that come up with something. Now imagine this in the context now of North and South Korea. What is it that the South Koreans are going to give up? What do you think in exchange for the promise of denuclearization that is going to be required of the South Koreans? Is the U.S. going to move out all of its forces? Is the government of South Korea going to give over control of the military to the North Koreans? And who do you think is going to be running this deal? The U.S. or the Chinese? Based on what we've seen, the Chinese and their attitude toward that region, their militaristic attitude toward that region, wanting to control that region, what do you think is going to be the result of that continent, that peninsula, being one country? It's a terrifying thought. Like, share, subscribe.